Good morning. Welcome to the introduction to CAT4 and welcome from sunny London, which makes a change. Today's session, I'm aiming to complete the formal PowerPoint slides part in about half an hour, which should leave plenty of time for an extended question and answer session. So the objectives of today, the aims of this session, are to provide you with an overview of CAT4, to explain the benefits of using CAT4, to show you some examples of ways in which the different reports can be used and indeed extract from different types of reports, and then to answer your questions in an extended question and answer session at the end. Just to start with an overall introduction to GL education, in case you aren't familiar with GL. Our assessments have been used by education, health and psychology professionals now for over 3 decades. So we've been around for over 30 years, but you may know us in a different guise. So we were originally founded by the National Foundation of Education Research, or NFER as it's known, but we are now GL Education, so a distinct entity. Our resources are used in over 100 countries worldwide, and we lead literacy, numeracy and ability testing in the UK. And the numbers themselves sort of stack up with 7 million tests have been delivered to pupils online. And in terms of our approach, so our assessments, whilst today is focused on CAT4, CAT4 forms part of our range of different assessments. And I think it's just important for me to just spend a few seconds just explaining how CAT4 fits in. So our philosophy is that it's important to have a 360-degree view of a learner. So the 360-degree is formed by understanding a pupil's ability and potential, which is where CAT4 fits in. And then, apologies, sorry, technical hitch there. And then it's important to understand where a pupil is now, so understanding their attainment. So that can be assessed through standardised assessments which we provide, such as progress in math, progress in English, new group reading test, or indeed teacher assessments or other standardised assessments. So it's important to understand attainment alongside that pupil's true potential. And then the third component is understanding a pupil's attitude, both towards themselves and towards their learning. And this can be assessed using our pupil attitude to self and school, known as the PASS survey. So that really, those 3 components form our 360-degree view of the pupil, which we would recommend. But I'm focusing on CAT4 today, so that's the assessment of ability and potential. So CAT4, why might a school use CAT4? One of the reasons is for admissions. So there's a quote here from Glenn Hardy at the British School of Manila, and I'm sure that many of you on this webinar today have this very similar situation to this. So this school has 46 different nationalities applying for places at the school, so wanting to come to the school. And it's important that each of those pupils or potential pupils, that they're assessed on a level playing field. So it doesn't matter which curriculum they've been exposed to or studied over the years, that they are assessed on the same criteria and basis. And that's where CAT4 can be used. But CAT isn't just an admissions assessment. It's used also for understanding a pupil's true potential within the school. So this is a quote from British International School of Cairo. So understanding a pupil much better, understanding how they think, how they learn, will allow them, and linking in back to that 360-degree view of the pupil, will allow you as a school to understand your pupils more effectively. So what is it? CAT4 is a recently standardised version of the well-established cognitive abilities test. It's the most widely used test of reasoning ability, with over 1 million students tested last academic year in the UK, and that number is increasing steadily. It helps you to understand pupils' developed abilities and their likely academic potential. CAT4 includes indicator grades, so that could be GCSE, IGCSE grades. Also, you can generate pointers for IB, so MYP and diploma. It doesn't rely on a pupil's understanding of English, so that's an important point to note. So there is, I'll go through the different batteries shortly, the different sections, but it's important just to emphasise that it doesn't rely on a pupil's understanding of English. There is one section, which is the verbal reasoning section, where when you're looking at the results from CAT, if it's an additional, English is an additional language student, which I'm sure many of the pupils who take CAT4 in your schools may well be, you might view that piece of data differently, but the test itself does not rely on pupils' understanding of English. And CAT4 provides instant results from the digital version, so it can help you to assess a pupil immediately. If it is for admissions, then that means obviously you can provide the results to the parents of the student very, very quickly. If it's being used within the school, so your pupils for streaming or for whatever purpose, just for understanding that pupil more effectively and being able to act on the information that's provided, then you can do that very quickly because those results are instant. And it's a web-based platform, so it doesn't involve you downloading any software onto your school network. It's web-based. So what is the CAT philosophy? Essentially, it's about basic building blocks of learning. So it's assessing a pupil's ability to recognise similarities between words and numbers and analogies and patterns and relationships. It's general, consists of assessment of general transferable skills. So it's not an attainment test which would rely on pupils having covered a certain curriculum. Hence why it can be used in that example that I quoted at the beginning from the British School of Manila. Pupils are coming from 46 different nationalities, different countries. There is no prerequisite of having studied a certain curriculum. Why would you use CAT? Well, the reasoning scores are strongly related to success in schoolwork, so it will give you a measure of potential for that learner. And also, pupils, as you know, differ in their usage, their preference for reasoning with words, numbers, shapes, and there will be a range of pupils and abilities, obviously, within your classroom. Also, reasoning ability isn't fixed. So it's not the case that a CAT score that a pupil has, let's say at age 11, age 12, is fixed. That is not the case. Reasoning ability can be developed, and through the reporting, which you'll see examples of in this webinar later, we make sure that there is a commentary in that reporting which will advise how that reasoning ability can be developed for that pupil. And the benefits of CAT testing are different for different roles within the school. So, for example, for classroom teachers, the data, the information comes out of CAT tests will obviously help the classroom teachers to set targets and have a much better understanding of that learner profile, and therefore to provide personalised learning in the classroom. The middle managers may be more useful from a cohort and learner analysis side of things, and also for measuring value added and for setting targets at more cohort level. And for senior managers and stakeholders, again, focus on value added and also resource and curriculum planning. and raising that school profile generally as well. So what's actually assessed within CAT4? There are four what we term batteries. So verbal, non-verbal, quantitative, and spatial. So verbal is thinking with words, quantitative, thinking with numbers, non-verbal, thinking with shapes, and spatial, thinking with shape and space. The two extremes are the verbal and against the spatial. Previously in CAT3, that would be verbal, non-verbal, but spatial is a new battery within CAT4. And I'll explain a little bit more in a moment about why that was added. The non-verbal and the quantitative are the hybrid batteries in those four. So they both use verbal and spatial to some degree, and that degree depends on the student's sort of natural inclinations. The two batteries which are most likely to be affected by schooling are the verbal and the quantitative. So that's where perhaps intervention in English and maths may well have affected the pupil's ability in those two batteries more than they would have been affected in non-verbal and spatial batteries. So I just want to give you a flavour of what the different questions might look like. So there's an example for each of the four batteries. I'll share an example of a question. So this is for non-verbal reasoning. Here the pupil is given three shapes in grey. Each of those first three figures that are shown there and against the word example, they're shaded, they've got four sides. And the pupil has to look for the answer choice. Obviously, in this case, it's also shaded and has four sides. I'll just leave you for a second to just look at that question. Pupils, when they're undertaking the assessment, would have headphones, so the instructions will also be given orally. For quantitative reasoning, this question starts with two numbers that are linked together in some way. So the pupil needs to select the answer of the number which should fit with where the question mark is shown. So in this example, to get from 2 to 3 and also from 9 to 10, you simply add 1. So 6 changes to 7. In the actual test itself, it may include adding, subtracting, multiplication, division to get the second half of each pair. So it's not always just a case of adding. For verbal reasoning, in each question here, there are 3 words in bold. The 3 words are similar in some way, and the pupil has to decide how they are the same and then select the choice accordingly. So the first 3 words here are green, blue, and red. Green, blue, and red, obviously all colours. So the pupil needs to look for an answer choice that is also a colour. And the correct answer here is yellow. And finally, spatial ability. In this example, it shows you a piece of paper that has been folded over in half, and then it's been hole punched. And the question is asking what the paper would look like when it's opened up. So in this example, because the paper was folded over, the hole would have gone through 2 layers. So when unfolded, there will be 2 holes. Therefore, the correct answer is B. Okay, so I mentioned a minute ago that we just talked about spatial ability. Spatial ability battery was added in this edition, this issue of CAT4. And the reason that it was added is it's an ability, a reasoning ability that has historically been under-assessed within the classroom, within schools. that there is a very close correlation between spatial ability and success in science, technology, engineering, and maths, and also we'd add visual arts into there as well. So that's really the reason behind spatial ability being added in. And spatial learners particularly I find personally really interesting in the classroom because the way that they respond, or they tend to respond, is interesting, and it doesn't tend to fit with traditional instruction. So traditional instruction in the classroom, obviously very sequential, concepts tend to be taught step by step, depends to some extent on repetition to embed that learning, and might be that assessments made under time conditions. And these approaches don't tend to fit with your average spatial learner. But obviously you don't know if a pupil is a spatial learner, particularly unless sometimes you might have a gut instinct, but unless you have that data in the form of CAT and the spatial ability data. So that shows the example there of the sequential approach which I just talked about, but then a spatial learner and how they would respond. They would tend to respond better to visual directions, maybe more whole-to-part learning rather than the step-by-step learning of traditional instruction within the classroom. Tend to be quite conceptual, so they can grasp bigger concepts more easily. Interestingly, they may be late or later developer as well, so sometimes you may feel that they are immature in their approach, and that is a natural characteristic often of spatial abilities. They are a later developer. In terms of administration of CAT4, as I mentioned earlier, it's web-based, so you don't have any software that you need to download. At the moment, it's roughly 3 sections of 45 minutes, but that will, at some point in the next few months, change to being adaptive. And at that point, it should be reduced to around 2 sections of 50 minutes. At the moment, the date is early 2015 for that change. Headphones are required because instructions are given through headphones, through audio as well. And for the technical requirements of running CAT4, if you're already running a digital assessment of ours, it's on exactly the same platform, which is our TestWise platform. If you haven't run any digital assessments before, please do get in touch. We can send out the technical requirement sheet, which is just a one-pager, which just summarises the IT setup and technical requirements for running any of our digital assessments. Okay, so I'm now going to show you a range of extracts from different reports that are available through CAT4. All of these reports are available instantaneously after you finished assessing the pupil or cohort of pupils, if it's a group. So we always advise within a cup of coffee, so 2 minutes after that pupil's finished, you can then log on to the TestWise system and you can generate the reports that you want to generate. This is an example here of probably the first page that you would look at within the group report for teachers. So this shows you, I just hover over, you can see that there is a score for verbal ability, quantitative, non-verbal, and spatial ability. And within each of those battery sections, you also have the number of questions attempted by that pupil, their standardised age score, and then also the group ranking. So the standardised age score is the most critical piece of data really within any CAT report, because that standardised age score is the data, the raw score for that pupil, which has been adjusted. That pupil has the scores then been placed in effect on the scale. So 100 is the 50th percentile average, So any pupil above 100 standardised age score is above average compared to that national sample, and below 100, below average against the national sample. 141 is the highest standardised age score. Number of questions attempted is always worth looking at, because you can see, just find the example. So here, Nick Watt in this example has actually only attempted 24 questions out of 36. His standardised age score is 99, and it's worth taking that into account when you're looking at standardised age score. First of all, just double check that there weren't any technical issues at that time with the pupil's computer not working, or something out of the ordinary happening like that. Or was it just the case that the pupil, from a processing side of things, just worked through the questions very slowly? So it may be in this case that if Nick had had a longer amount of time, that actually he might well have scored much more highly. So it's worth it. It could be a flag for assessing, processing, more diagnostically, with a further, more detailed test specifically around processing for that pupil. In this case, Jenny Coyle, whose name is circled here, you can see this is a classic example of a pupil with an extreme spatial bias. So looking across her scores for verbal, she has 101, for quantitative 118, for non-verbal 115, and then over on spatial 131. So this is the sort of pupil who I was just talking about will probably respond much better within the classroom to more visual sort of flow charts, conceptual work, grasping bigger concepts generally. Probably will respond better through a bit of movement within the classroom as well, not rote learning approach. So quite a different approach to the traditional sequential approach used in the classroom. You'll also see here, the last column, there is also a mean standardised age score there. The mean standardised age score can be useful to just get a snapshot of that learner, but I always add a caveat really with looking at mean standardised age scores, because it can also cover imbalances within the different batteries. So for example, if a pupil had a verbal score of 100, a quantitative score of 100, non-verbal 85 and spatial 115, that would come out at 100, but actually there's some quite significant differences within that pupil's range of battery scores. That's an example really just to show you that IB pointers exist within the reports as well. So when you're generating a group report for teachers, if you are using IB within your school and want to generate those IB pointers, then there's just a simple tick box that you select, and that will generate those IB pointers for you. And another example here. So this is on one specific pupil, just showing their GCSE indicators, or it could be IGCSE. And the group report for teachers, it's not obviously just about indicators, it's about identifying the learning bias, whether that be spatial, verbal, or no bias for the pupil. So this is an example of a scattergram that will appear within your group report for teachers, and you can see that each one of these dots here represents a pupil, and any pupil within that white area doesn't have a learning bias. But this sort of pupil here on the right-hand side, if I just put my marker just over that dot so that you can see it in that purple area on the right-hand side, that pupil has an extreme spatial bias. So the spatial standardised age score is very high, up to not far off 130. Whereas if you look across the left, their verbal standardised age score is about average, so 100. In reality, that pupil is likely to be underachieving, because in order to fully access their full potential, their verbal ability probably needs to be developed a little bit further because of the way the curriculum tends to be taught, and obviously formal assessments made as well. The individual report for teachers is also available. Let me just show you an example of that. So this is a report that you can generate for each individual who's taken CAT4. So in this example, this is Tom, and you can see that Tom's individual scores for each of those 4 batteries are shown here. So that's his standardised age score, national percentile ranking, Stay 9 score, which is a way of banding in 9 different bands, and group ranking, so that you can see Tom against his peers within that cohort, how he's performed. This also shows where Tom is on the scattergram, so on the spatial versus verbal standardised age score. So he's obviously much more over on the spatial bias. And I think this is probably the most important section of the individual report for teachers, because one of the questions I'm often asked is what's the difference between CAT3 and CAT4 by schools who have used CAT3 in the past. The 2 main differences are, one, the addition of spatial ability battery, but the second thing is the sort of data richness, if that's such a word, of the reporting. So whereas previously with CAT3 reporting you had the data, now we've developed a lot of commentary so that there's less legwork that you need to do to interpret that data. We actually provide, so in this individual report for teachers, a profile of, in this case, this is Connor Gibson in Year 7, so a profile of Connor, and then in this section here, the implications for teaching and learning. So going back to my point earlier about reasoning ability is not something that is just fixed in stone. It's something that you would want to develop within your learners because of that correlation with future attainment. And we advise here implications for the teaching and learning. So in other words, how you may well develop the reasoning ability for Connor in this example. And within the reports, the individual report for teachers as well, this is an example. This is Key Stage 3 indicators, which I know may not be relevant to all of you, but this would be available for GCSE, IGCSE indicators as well. So this is almost like the chance graph, the probability of obtaining each level. So whereas this is national curriculum level shown here, this could well be A star A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then it would give you the probability percentage against Peter, in this case, achieving those different grades. So you can use the parent and student reports. I think I'll show you an example of the student reports to generally inform and encourage support for a more holistic partnership, really, with parents. And this all links back to that 360-degree view as well of the learner. So apologies, this is quite small, but it's really just to give you a flavour of, this is the individual report for students. There's also one available for parents. So this student one sort of stripped out educational jargon. This is very much written for the student to allow them to understand more about themselves, more about the way that they actually learn. And that can really encourage quite a lot of independence and taking on responsibility more for their own learning. So I've seen that quite a lot in practice when pupils have sat down with a teacher, actually talked through this report. There is often a sort of sense of ownership really that's transferred over, because suddenly it's a light bulb moment for the pupil and they understand much more about why they find some things harder or easier, and why they have preferences for maybe certain subjects or different teaching styles and so on. So it can be very insightful for the learner. The parent report is more focused on how the parent can actually help their son or daughter at home. So that might be with homework, but also an awareness of, again, understanding the way that their son or daughter learn. And there's also a senior leaders report for teachers as well. So this is an example. So this is distribution of verbal scores. This is by English as an additional language. So if you've marked the pupils who are taking CAT4 as EAL, which was mentioned earlier, is probably quite a significant amount of your pupils. If you wanted the graphical distribution of those learners, that's where it would be shown at quite a cohort level in the senior leader report. So to summarise the possible uses of CAT within the school, it can be used to identify students or indeed groups of students who might be underachieving and require additional support or stretching. So that's really, if you're looking at attainment data alongside CAT data, that means that you have CAT data on their ability and potential versus attainment, where are they now, and you can identify differences between. It can also be used to inform target setting in national tests and public examinations, to identify individual pupils' cognitive strengths and weaknesses, so in other words, their learning profile, to help inform the teaching and learning of that pupil, and then also to monitor intake ability against standardised data as well. So to also monitor changes over time and set a baseline for value added by the school. As I've briefly mentioned as I've gone through, comparisons can also be made with other standardised tests. So CAT4 is particularly powerful when you're adopting that 360-degree approach of looking at ability and potential data alongside attainment data, alongside attitude data, so that you understand those three different components of a pupil. I think I've probably covered most of this, but using indicators for targets, why use them? Well, the pupil then has the ownership of their targets. It sets high yet achievable targets, so realistic expectations for the pupil. Might be used strategically to identify these students at borderline grades, particularly as well. And sorry, I clicked ahead a little bit too quickly. And in terms of informing subject choice, so I've had quite a lot of anecdotal feedback about using CAT4, to year 9 at option choices. It can really help to inform that subject choice, so when learners are at that stage. Because it can be, it's a sort of data foundation of that decision, and pupils actually looking at the probability of achieving different grades, or use a teacher looking at probability. It allows you to have an informed discussion, an informed decision then hopefully is made about subject choices for that pupil. Okay, that's really the level of detail that I'm going to cover today. From a contacting point of view, we've obviously got the question and answer session coming up. From a contact point of view, the email address shown is the generic international inbox email address. My email address is there, should you have any more detailed questions after this WebEx.